How many parts of speech are there in English? If verbs are one part of speech and nouns are another part of speech, how many are there in total? 9, 8, 10? Find out in this episode of
Aprender Ingles con Reza y Craig.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Aprender Ingles con Reza y Craig. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And together with many, many years of teaching English between us, Reza and I are going to help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you, Reza?
Well, I'm not bad now, Craig. I did have a bit of a cold, as many people have, but now I'm recovering. I'm better, almost myself. What about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm sad to hear you were not well or under the weather, as we say, but I'm pleased you're recovering and you're almost back to normal. Do we have any feedback this week?
We certainly do. We have a voice message from Veronica Morfin, or Ronnie.
Okay, let's listen to Ronnie.
Hello, Craig and Reza. I hope you have had a great Christmas time and you did a good bucket list for this year. I just want to share my bucket list. I will learn the Russian keyboard so I can write in English, but with the letters in Russian. I have two friends who are Russian, and I like to understand what are the messages they send sometimes. A video and with subtitles in Russian. Oh, it's hard, but then they explain in English. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you very much for your voice message, Ronnie. That's amazing, isn't it? Learning the Russian keyboard to type and write in Russian. That's a great New Year's resolution.
Yep, I can see, Ronnie, you like to challenge yourself. You like to push yourself. That's going to be very interesting.
And interestingly, Ronnie mentioned a bucket list, and not a goal or an ambition or a New Year's resolution, like from the beginning of the year, from January. And a bucket list is a list of things that you really, really want to do before you die. If you're interested in making your own bucket list, there's a really good film that we've mentioned before, actually, called The Bucket List. And it stars Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. And I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can go and look at this film on a website and read about it, because it's very good to watch in English if you're interested in this kind of thing. Have you made a bucket list, Reza?
I certainly have a bucket list as regards things I want to do before I die. I don't have one specifically for this year, but it might not be a bad idea to include something about home improvements, but I don't even want to go there. I don't want to get into that theme again, but home improvements.
Wasn't that last year's bucket list?
Yes, and the one before, and the one before, and the one before. Yes.
So if you maybe want to buy your first home, or start a blog, or visit the Grand Canyon, meet a famous person, do a parachute jump, anything like that could be on your bucket list. And if you want to tell us about your bucket list, why not do what Veronica did and send us a voice message? So going back to Ronnie's message, she obviously spoke about using the Russian keyboard. Keyboard is teclado. Reza, did you hear anything in Ronnie's message that she could improve on?
Well, not much, because it was fantastic. Such good pronunciation and intonation and good grammar, vocabulary. Very, very good. But one tiny little thing. Ronnie, you said, I'd like to understand what are the message they send, I think, or something like that. Well, there's a couple of mistakes there. First of all, you can't say our message, because message is singular. So what are the messages? And also the order. You said, I'd like to understand what are, but it should be what the messages are. because it isn't a question. You're not asking a question. You're saying that you'd like to understand what the messages are. And that's an indirect question. It's not a direct question. So you don't use the question word form. You don't invert the order.
Yeah, it's like all those little tags that you use at the beginning of indirect questions, like I'd like to know what the messages are. Could you tell me what the messages are? I was wondering what the messages are. Yeah, so be careful of those, the word order with those indirect questions. Next, we have another message from Rafa from Alicante. Let's listen to Rafa.
Hello, Craig. Hello, Reza. My name is Rafa. I come from Alicante and I have just been listening to English podcasts, tips and advice with Anna. I highly recommend FCE training podcast if you are interested in improving your grammar skills. It helped me very much with phrasal verbs and to widen my vocabulary. In order to improve my listening skills, I usually use iVoox podcast where I listen to BBC News and of course Aprender Ingles, La Mansión del Inglés, the best program in the world. English listening practice is another program I like very much. I think it might be interesting for somebody else. Thank you for your program. I enjoy.
Thank you very much, Rafa, for your lovely message. Any comments, Reza?
That was a very useful message, Rafa. It's always interesting to be able to pass on our listeners' advice to other listeners, because you guys are the ones who are learning. You guys probably know more than us about the difficulties learning English, because you're doing it right now. So it's extremely useful to get any tips we can from you. So thanks very much, Rafa.
Yeah, and Rafa was speaking about an episode we did with our friend Anna, and we gave advice on self-study and learner diaries and that kind of thing. And if you're interested in that, go to episode 186. So that's inglespodcast.com/186. We spoke about 8 self-study tips. And Rafa mentioned the FCE Trainer podcast. So I took a look at that. I looked at it. And yes, it's on iVoox, IVOOX, and it's listening tests from the book. So if you're studying with a past paper FCE book on the exam, you will find the audio of the listening texts on iVoox. And of course, you can find this podcast on iVoox. It's a very good way to listen to podcasts, and it's aimed at the Spanish community. So if you're a Spanish speaker, why not go to iVoox and see what resources and material you can find on their platform. And Rafa also mentioned a paid service called English Listening Practice. Now, I looked at that also. It's $3 per month, which is affordable, not too much money, and you can improve your listening with their service. Did you hear anything that Rafa could improve on in his message, Reza?
Well, speaking about the Spanish community, as Craig was, a typical Spanish mistake in pronunciation is an intrusive eh sound, which you repeated a few times, Rafa. We understood you, but you said things like skills rather than skills. So the first sound that comes out of your mouth should be s, not skills, Spain, Spanish, etc.
And one other thing, Rafa, remember with the verb enjoy, you need an object. Remember in English, it's subject, verb, object. So I enjoy, you need an object. You need something. You can say, for example, I enjoy your podcast, I enjoy your program, or I enjoy it. So the pronoun can also be the object, but you need an object with enjoy. You must enjoy something, okay?
That's another typical Spanish mistake, isn't it? Because isn't it disfrutar in Spanish? And you can say, estoy disfrutando. Mm-hmm. You can say that in Spanish. But in English, you can't say, I'm enjoying.
And you
got to say what?
And you can say me gusta, but you have to say in English, I like it, or I like the podcast. And be careful again of the pronunciation of podcast. when Spanish speakers say that word podcast, sometimes it sounds like postcard. It's pod, P-O-D, podcast. So try to separate those two words when you say them and then slowly speed up and make it faster. Podcast, 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 podcast. And the stress is on the first syllable, podcast.
But by the way, if any of you are traveling on holiday and you're fans and you want to send us a postcard, please do. We'd love to receive una tarjeta postal.
Yeah.
Maybe a digital one.
Do people still send those? I don't know if people send those anymore. They just send a photograph on WhatsApp, don't they?
I guess so, yeah. Send us photos, please, if you go traveling.
And have a great holiday.
Okay, Craig, down to business. Ooh, the serious stuff begins.
What does down to business mean?
Down to business means we're going to talk about what we're really here to talk about, are the difficult stuff or the hard stuff.
The meat and potatoes. Don't start singing. Don't start singing. Those meat and potatoes. The parts of speech. Now, when I was at school, a long time ago, I was taught in my English class that there were 8 parts of English speech. So if verb is one part, noun is another part, adverbs another part, 3. So how many are there altogether? How many were you taught at school?
Well, you were lucky, Craig. You were lucky to be even taught this. Nobody taught me anything about it at school. I had to investigate myself long after I left school. Mm-hmm. I looked into it myself because I went to university to do a TEFL course, teaching English as a foreign language course, and that's when I first found out about it. At school, nobody said anything about it.
And what did they say on the course? How many?
Oh, well, the book we used, I can't remember what it is now, but the book we used at that time, so we're talking 30 years ago, said that there were 10 parts of speech. But I remember at the time finding other sources that said 9 and some that said just 8. It depends how you want to divide it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you go to Google and you Google the parts of English speech or how many parts of English speech, some authorities, some recognized dictionaries and grammars say 9 or 10 or 8. So not everybody agrees how many parts they are. So let's look at them separately and see if we can make some sense and understand these different parts of speech. So what's the first one?
Well, let's start off with verbs. Verbs. For example, are, the verb to be, go, take, love, eat, etc. We could say, I love this podcast.
I love it too.
The love in that sentence is a verb. In fact, if you want to have a sentence, a complete sentence, you have to have a verb. That's the one thing you must have. But Craig, there are verbs and there are verbs.
Yeah, this is where immediately with number 1, we're going into unknown territory, which means we have a controversy about verbs. So you've got your main verbs, as Reza said, study, work, etc. And there are also operator verbs, modal verbs, verbs like must, can, do, did, be, will, could, and might. So these are modal verbs, auxiliary verbs, verbs that do not behave the same as full verbs, verbos principales. They don't have the same behavior.
What I learned back in that TEFL course years ago was they told me operator verbs operate other verbs. Mm-hmm. They're purely operational, so to speak. That's why they're the operator verbs. They have no use on their own. They can only operate other actions.
So if I say, I must go to the doctor's, then must is operating the verb go, because you can also say I should go, I could go, I might go, I may go. So they're really adjusting the main verb.
Right. Because if imagine Craig just said, I must, you would say, you must what? we don't really know what he's talking about because he hasn't got a main verb.
And of course, auxiliary verbs, for example, to ask questions. You could say, do you enjoy our podcast? So enjoy is our main verb, and do is the auxiliary verb that, again, is operating the main verb.
By the way, the correct answer to do you enjoy our podcast is yes, very much indeed is the correct answer.
You must. What's number 2?
Number 2 on our list is adverbs. So an adverb is not a verb, but it's called an adverb, I guess, because it can be added to give description to a verb. It can describe a verb. So adverb. But that word is not very useful really, because an adverb can also describe an adjective.
Mm-hmm.
And it can also describe another adverb. Yes, one adverb can describe another adverb. Examples of adverbs are slowly, clearly, fast, everywhere, yesterday, very, really.
So many adverbs end in ly. Carefully, wonderfully, clearly, slowly, but not obviously all of them. So there are other adverbs that do not end in ly.
Yeah, they're easy to identify when they end in ly, but not so easy if they don't end in ly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For example, here's an exception already, but a very common one. She works well. The word well is an adverb, but it doesn't end in ly. Well is the adverb which comes from the adjective good. Good is the adjective. Well is the adverb. So work is a verb. She works. So if I want to describe how she works, I must use an adverb. I can't use an adjective. She works well. English.
But she's a good worker.
Right, because good would be an adjective describing worker. Yeah.
Although well can be confusing because you could say, how are you? I'm well, which is a different meaning. So it can be an adjective in a different sentido. How are you feeling? I'm well. I'm healthy. I'm fine.
Yeah, as we'll see, as many words can have more than one meaning and can be more than one part of speech. Well is also a noun, a well of water. It depends in the context, right?
Un pozo.
Both, all right.
Reza's a great teacher. He teaches well.
Oof, I don't know about that.
Another example, Mr. Bolt runs extremely fast. So fast is the adverb and extremely is the modifier.
Yeah, but it's another adverb.
It's exactly.
It's modifying an adverb. So one adverb, extremely, is modifying the other adverb, fast. There is no word fastly. That doesn't exist. Quickly exists, but not fast plus ly.
So those are adverbs. So we have number 1, verbs. Number 2, adverbs. Number 3, nouns or naming words, words that name things. Now, nouns can be people. They can be things. They can be animals, places. They can be ideas or events. So some examples. This podcast is the business. It's really good. So podcast is a noun. It's a thing. And it's the business, which is another thing. Okay. Reza is a great bloke.
Oh, that's very kind. Flattery. Piropo.
What's bloke in English? How do you say that in Spanish?
Un tío.
Un tío majo. Yeah. Reza is a noun, a proper noun. So names of people, names of places are proper nouns. For example, Valencia, New York, Craig, Reza, etc. And bloke is also a noun. A great guy.
We just say I'm a proper bloke as well.
Yeah.
Un tío de verdad.
Un tío de categoría.
A proper bloke.
Categoría, hombre.
I'm a proper bloke. Not one of these modern, soft guys. No. I'm a proper bloke.
Not one of these plastic ones from China. No, a real bloke. And obviously names. So we live in Valencia. We live in Spain. Valencia and Spain are also proper nouns.
Have you noticed that you can put two words of the same part of speech together? Craig just said, we live in Valencia, Spain. Valencia is a proper noun. Spain is a proper noun. They can be right together. And earlier we said, Mr. Bolt runs extremely fast. Extremely is an adverb. Fast is an adverb. You can have two types of the same part of speech together in the same sentence. It's not so common, but it happens.
moving on to number 4 and pronouns, pronombres. So, for example, I, me, it, she, mine. This pen is mine. Hers, we, who, etc. All of those words are pronouns. And an example sentence, we had no water, so she offered us hers. Again, as Reza said, 2 pronouns together, us and hers, next to each other. She is also a pronoun. She offered us hers. And we is also a pronoun. We had no water, so she offered us hers, or her water.
Yeah, we got 3 different types of pronouns there, but they're all pronouns. We and she are the subjects of verbs. Us is an indirect object. She offered the water to us. And hers is a possessive pronoun. Her water, her. So 3 different types of pronoun there in that sentence.
Number 5, adjectives. Now, adjectives describe a noun. Would you agree with that, Reza?
Usually, but there's one exception.
Okay, let me give examples of common usual adjectives and then give me your exceptions. So examples of some adjectives: wonderful. This is a wonderful city. Big. This is a big building. Spanish. My wife is Spanish. Attractive. She's also very attractive. Hardworking.
Is she hardworking?
Reza's very hardworking.
His wife is as well, believe me.
She is, yeah. She's very, very hardworking.
She's also wonderful, but she isn't big. She isn't big. That's the one thing she isn't.
She's marvelous. Another adjective, marvelous. There are some marvelous attractions for adventurous tourists in Greece. Adventurous, describing the tourists, which is a noun, so adjective noun, and marvelous, describing the attractions. Marvelous attractions. There are some marvelous attractions for adventurous tourists in Greece.
I said there was an exception, and I'm just thinking, no, there isn't really an exception. Craig's definition is quite right, and it's concise, better this way. It describes a noun. However, you can use an adjective with a verb. Remember we said it's adverbs which describe verbs, like Mr. Bolt runs extremely fast. Well, extremely fast describes how he runs. But with the verb to be and a few other verbs, you can have an adjective. For example, he is happy. Happy is an adjective, but it's going with the verb to be. There's no noun, but it's describing he, which is a pronoun. So it describes something or someone. That's true. But you can actually have an adjective rather than an adverb with a few verbs. The verb to be, the verb feel, I feel good. The verb think, I think big. You know, there are a few exceptions.
So you can say he is a happy man, where you'd have the noun and the adjective before it, or you can just say he is happy without the noun.
Right.
What's next?
Now we're getting into slightly more difficult terminologies. A determiner. Sorry, I said it wrong. A determiner.
Oh, I say determinator. A terminator, a determinator. No, it's determiner, a determiner.
I'm determined to pronounce it properly, even if it kills me.
What is a determiner determined to do? What does it do?
Well, it determines, if you like, or limits, perhaps is better, it limits a noun. Mm-hmm. It limits it. So we're talking about words such as the, a, or an, this, that, some, each, etc. Here's an example sentence. There are too many potatoes on my plate.
That sentence is for Lewis, my friend Lewis, who likes that sentence. There are too many potatoes on Lewis's plate.
So too is a determiner, and also many is a determiner, because too many limits the noun potatoes. It tells you about how much or how many or exactly the quantity, something about the potatoes. There are too many. It determines how much. Here's another sentence, which is quite true. Some people have all the luck. Not me, but some people have all the luck. Some is a determiner because it determines how many people, some people, but not all the people. But those people have all the luck.
Todo.
100%.
Todo la suerte.
All and the are determiners. Craig, the next category is very tricky to learn the vocabulary of prepositions.
Yes, that's something that I'm sure you know, listener, dear listeners, many questions that we have received about prepositions. Words like under, of, off, so of with one F, off with two Fs, on, in, throughout, despite. All of those words are prepositions and quite problematic because sometimes they are the same in Spanish if you translate them, and sometimes they're completely different. So it seems like a lottery, but a preposition. So example sentence, the guitarist broke away from the group before July in an unexpected announcement, despite his promise to stay. How many prepositions do you hear in that sentence? Listen again. The guitarist broke away from the group before July in an unexpected announcement, despite his promise to stay. So 4 I counted. Away from, that are together. He broke away from. Before July, number 3. In an unexpected announcement. And despite his promise to stay.
But hold on, that's 5.
That's 5, yeah.
Isn't it?
I said 4, didn't I? Sorry, 5.
The one which throws, that means which causes confusion for most people, including native English speakers, is probably the word despite. It doesn't look like a preposition.
Looks like a conjunction.
Yep. But it is a preposition. That causes a lot of confusion because generally with prepositions, we think of the use of prepositions for time, like before July, or
At.
place, at
6 o'clock.
At 6 o'clock, or on the table. Yeah, but there are many other uses of preposition, and sometimes prepositions are used to join bits of sentences together, but they're not strictly speaking conjunctions. Despite is a preposition. Our next group, which is
Conjunctions. Words like and, because, while, when, or, etc. For example, make hay while the sun shines. I love that expression. Make hay while the sun shines. So while is our conjunction. And what does that sentence mean? Hay is paja, isn't it?
technically speaking eno. I think it's eno.
I didn't know.
Paja is straw.
I didn't know that word. Yeah.
Paja
Yeah,
is
you're
straw.
right.
And
Paja is
hay is
straw.
eno, a bit softer, isn't it?
Okay. So what does that mean? Make hay while the sun shines.
Hace el heno mientras brilla el sol.
It's the same in Spanish.
No, it isn't. No.
Oh.
It just means make the best of the moment.
Make
So-
the best of the situation.
Farmers, particularly in Britain and Ireland, where it rains a lot, know that there isn't much time to make hay if you want it to be good hay because it rains a lot. So it's better to make it when the sun shines. Do it quick. Take advantage of the sunshine and make the hay now because tomorrow, who knows? Maybe it's going to rain.
So, for example, when we record this podcast, sometimes we hear noises from the neighbours next door. We have noisy neighbours sometimes during the day. But at the moment, I don't know if you've noticed, Reza, they're completely quiet. So I think we should make hay while the sun shines and record as many podcasts as we can before they start making noise. Moving on to number 9. Now, this was not a part of speech when I was at school, but apparently now it is. Interjections and exclamations.
What?
Exactly.
What? They've changed it?
Words like what? Hey. Ouch.
It wasn't a part of speech, but now it is. I say that's incredible.
I say is another one. You spill some wine or you spill some water, echas un poco de agua, and you say oops in English. That also is an exclamation. Words like oh and wow. I bought a new computer. Wow, it's fantastic. So these kind of words, hey, ouch, wow, oops, oh, etc., that we can't really categorize them as adjectives or verbs or nouns or adverbs. So there's a separate group for these exclamations we make or interjections. So that's number 9.
And they're a very common part of speech. They're very, very common. Unfortunately...
Spoken English more.
In spoken English particularly, yeah. Unfortunately, many of them cannot be said on our podcast because many of them are rude.
Yeah.
For example, someone's just stolen your car. You might say, beep. We can't say it on the podcast. That beep, beginning with the letter F, for example, is an exclamation or interjection. Or I bang my foot against the table. I go, ay, what the beep?
Yeah.
Many of them are bad or rude words.
Or if you bang your foot, you could say ouch, which is another... what's our final category, perhaps?
Well, it's quite ironic because we've been counting so far up to 9, but I'm going to count up to 10. And to do that, I'm going to use an enumerator.
Oh, what's an enumerator? It sounds like something a Terminator would use.
Yeah. An enumerator is just to count. So some people, as far as I know, a lot of people include enumerators in determiners because you could say that it determines or limits the noun.
Yeah, you can say I've got an apple or you can say I've got one apple.
Right. No difference, right? One. So 1 is an enumerator, 2, 3, but also words like first, second, third, 12th, 31st. So cardinal and ordinal numbers are enumerators. But not only that, there are a few other things like a dozen, you could say, is an enumerator. But
Dozen is 12 if you didn't know.
12, yeah. But una decena. But some people are arguing saying, no, it isn't. Some people say it's an article a plus a noun dozen. Yeah, it's a grey area.
Yeah, so it's
a grey area.
I noticed that it's not agreed upon. Not everybody agrees that this is a separate category, but we're throwing it in there so that you know.
As a possibility. For example, they counted 11 famous actors in one Hollywood cafe. So 11, enumerator, tells you how many actors, and 1, how many cafes. You could have it as a category.
You could.
Craig, I have an idea. Why don't we get the listeners to test themselves?
That's a great idea.
What about if we read you out a sentence, short sentence, and you focus on just one part of speech and try to find all of the words which are that part of speech? For example, if I say to you, find all the adjectives, but only adjectives in this sentence, forget everything else. Here's the sentence. Some lovely learners tell us Aprender Ingles with Reza and Craig is a very useful podcast. The word lovely and the word useful are our adjectives there. So if I asked you to find only the adjectives, the words are lovely, describing learners, and useful, describing podcast. Shall we try that for each type of word?
Yeah, let's start with, first of all, our first category, which, if you remember, was verbs. So, can you find the verbs in this sentence? Ready? Watch where you're going, idiot. I'll repeat. Watch where you're going, idiot. Did you find them? Did you hear them? Watch, the imperative, watch where you're going. So, watch is one verb. And you're going, present continuous with go, you're going is the second one. Watch where you're going, idiot. Watch and go.
The second one. Look out only for adverbs. Adverbs. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well, Mr. Whelan often says.
That's my dad.
Yep. I'll repeat that. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well, Mr. Whelan often says. Did you get the adverbs? There were 2. Well and often, the adverb of frequency. Well and often.
Interesting you say often because I say often.
Yes, but I've checked this and definitely both pronunciations are accepted. Yeah.
Next we have nouns, so that's group 3, nouns. Listen for the nouns in this sentence. The invention of the mobile phone has changed our world. Again, the invention of the mobile phone has changed our world. Did you find them? 3 nouns: invention, mobile phone, and world. The invention of the mobile phone has changed our world.
The next group, pronouns. Look out only for pronouns. The man who lives there is my brother's friend, not mine. I'll repeat. The man who lives there is my brother's friend, not mine. Did you find the 2 pronouns? The first, who, relative pronoun, and the second, mine, the possessive pronoun. Who and mine.
Our next group, adjectives, number 5. Listen, find the adjectives. A very wise old woman once told me to be happier for my own good. Again, a very wise old woman once told me to be happier for my own good. Okay, so the adjectives. We had 2 together describing the woman, wise and old. A very wise is sabio, a very wise old woman once told me to be happier, another adjective, for my own good. Okay, so 4 adjectives: wise, old, happier, and own.
And the word good is not an adjective in that sentence. Good is not an adjective in that sentence. Mi proprio bien. It's a noun in that sentence. What we said earlier, do you remember? Some words change the meaning depending on the sentence. They're part of speech. Number 6, look for determiners. Determiners, the words that limit or determine the noun. Here we go. Some people complain about the huge crowds at many popular events. I'll repeat. Some people complain about the huge crowds at many popular events. There were 3 determiners. They were some people, the huge crowds, and many popular events. Some, the, many.
Number 7, prepositions. Okay, you're listening for prepositions. In a way, I admit I'm in debt to John for his help until now. Again, in a way, I admit I'm in debt to John for his help until now. Did you find them? In, first one, in a way. I admit I'm in debt, to be in debt, to John, so to, and for his help, for. And finally, until is also a preposition. So in, twice, to, for, and until. Listen again. In a way, I admit I'm in debt to John for his help until now.
The next group we want you to look for are conjunctions. Mary says that we must sink or swim because there's a crisis. I'll repeat. Mary says that we must sink or swim because there's a crisis. There were 3 conjunctions there. That, which often joins 2 parts of a sentence to introduce what we call a that clause, that we must sink or swim. That, or sink or swim. And the last one, because there's a crisis. That, or because.
And number 9 was the group about speaking about interjections and exclamations, words like oops, oh, wow, etc. So listen to this sentence and find the interjections and exclamations. Ouch! Hey! Watch what you're doing with that pole. How do you say pole in Spanish?
Palo.
Palo. Yeah. Again. Ouch! Hey! Watch what you're doing with that pole. So the first 2 words were exclamations. Ouch! Hey! Okay, watch what you're doing with that pole.
Isn't it funny that exclamations that you would think are universal, some of them aren't, like ouch Spanish people don't say ouch.
They say ow,
They
don't they?
go ow, but they don't
Ow.
say ouch. So even things which are really, really basic, like when you're in pain, you would think it's universal. It isn't.
No.
And I bet Chinese people don't go ouch or ow. I bet they have something else.
And I've heard, because I've unfortunately been spending quite a lot of time recently in hospital, I've heard people screaming, aye.
Yeah.
For pain. Aye, aye, aye. Where an English person will go, ow, ow, ah, or maybe ah. And they probably wouldn't say, hey you. They would say, oh yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, oh yeah. So yeah, different. They don't translate into other languages.
We'll add one more group, the controversial group, as Craig said. Some would include it, some wouldn't, as a separate group. Enumerators. In other words, numbers to count. Can you find them? On the 6th of May at 8 o'clock, the one and only Shakira will be performing live. I'll repeat. On the 6th of May at 8 o'clock, the one and only Shakira will be performing live. There were 3 enumerators, 6th of May, 8 o'clock, the time, and 1, the one and only Shakira. There aren't 2, there's only one Shakira. They were your 3 enumerators.
And remember, you can find these sentences written in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/194. We're getting very, very close now to our episode 200, our 200th episode of Aprender Ingles con Reza y Craig. And to change the format a little bit for this, to celebrate our 200th show, we would like you to ask us a question. You can ask us anything, but please not about English. Anything you like, and we will answer your questions on episode 200. And you can send us your voice messages with your question via SpeakPipe, which is at speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe/Ingles podcast. Or you could send your questions by email to Reza at belfastreza@gmail.com.
Or to Craig at inglespodcast.com.
And before we go, we'd like to say a big thank you to all our Patreon sponsors, our patrons on Patreon, especially to Bruno, our gold sponsor, who runs walking tours of Copenhagen in English or Spanish. You can find his tours at copenhagenwalkingtour.com. If you are in Copenhagen or thinking of going there, we definitely recommend you get in touch with Bruno, who will organize a walking tour of that lovely city. And it's copenhagenwalkingtour.com. Also, if you happen to be in Rio de Janeiro or thinking of going there, get in touch with Bruno and he will arrange a walking guide of the favelas in Rio, led by local guides only. Now, it's perfectly safe. These guides know the area, they live in the area, and by doing the walking guides, you're helping the community to improve on their daily needs. And that website to find those tours is at favelawalkingtour.com.br. All those links in the show notes at inglespodcast.com.
And thanks to the rest of our Patreon sponsors, who are Beatriz, Pedro, Maite, Rafa, Nestor at nestorgm.com, Sara, Carlos, Mamen, Juan Leva, Corey Finneran at ivenv.com, Miren, Jose Luis, Agus, Mariel, Manuel García Betagon, Rafael, Manuel Tarazona, Juan Carlos, Pilar Martinez, Gambate Blog, Ana Giovanna, Igor, Ignacio, Kieran. And our latest patrons, Carlos Garcia, Pachi Ibanez, and Ana Ibarra.
Yeah, thank you very much to all of you. And we now have 28 patrons of the show, and you are donating a total of $71 per month, which means that we are nearly 3/4 of the way to our target of $100 per month. If you've been thinking about joining our Patreon program for as little as $1 per month, you get instant access to recent transcriptions, lovingly translated by Angelica Bello. And you can join this Patreon program, get your name on the show, join our community, receive those transcriptions by going to patreon.com/Ingles podcast.
And also thanks to Patricia Alonso, who continues working hard to transcribe episodes for you. We already have episodes 1 to 17 and 131 to 142. So thanks to Patricia for her hard work.
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. What's next week, Reza?
On next week's episode, expressions with take and get.
Sounds good. We'll see you next week. Have a great week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next podcast. It's goodbye from Reza.
And bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.